it actually somehow feels really appropriate to be able to be on a big stage, not to be standing behind a podium, because it is just so good to see everybody in person. Thank you for rejoining us for our first major in-person public program in nearly 2 years. So thank you. And you guys are in for a major treat this afternoon. I'm so happy that we can reopen with such an extraordinary artist visiting from California and such an amazing pair of exhibitions. I know that you're in for a great treat with Jona Frank's show, and you're going to hear more about it in a few moments. I hope that you'll have a chance to join us again next week when we celebrate Marsha Resnick as it is and as it could be. So we have an amazing slate of offerings for you this spring. And thank you again for being with us today. So as I think many of you know, I'm Ann Collins Goodyear. I'm the co-director of the Bowdoin College Museum of Art. I'm going to do something very daring. I'm going to strip this off. Go this way? All right, got it. I'm very glad that Trisha Welsh, who actually knows something about cinema, is here to help me out a little bit. All right, stage left. At any rate, we are delighted to have all of you with us this afternoon as we open the exhibition, Jona Frank Model Home, on view from today up until the 5th of June. This exhibition, as you'll have an opportunity to hear today, has long roots and has a direct relationship to a memoir published by the artist in December 2020, Cherry Hill, A Childhood Reimagined. Before we begin our discussion today, I want to thank Jona for her many years of friendship and for all the work that she has put into the show here at Bowdoin that frames and expands upon her Cherry Hill series. Jona is a nationally recognized photographer who has exhibited her work nationally and internationally. She received her BA in English from the University of Southern California and continued at USC to do graduate work in film production. She has exhibited at such institutions as the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, the Exploratorium, the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, and now, of course, at the BCMA. Her work has been widely collected, both privately and by such institutions as the Getty, the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and we are just thrilled that it is now hanging right next door. Jona has also published 4 acclaimed books dedicated to specific series, including High School in 2004, Write, Portraits from the Evangelical Ivy League in 2008, The Modern Kids in 2015, and Cherry Hill in 2020. Today, we're happy to add the exhibition catalog on which she collaborated, Jona Frank Model Home, to the list. And we hope you can join us following this program for an exhibition premiere and a book signing. Present in spirit this evening, although he is unable to be with us in person, is Alex Kallman, the talented designer and editor who designed both Cherry Hill and the exhibition and accompanying catalog, Jona Frank Model Home. His partnership in this project has been generative and joyful. We thank him profusely for his generosity with his time and his talent. There are a number of other words of appreciation that must be shared. I want to offer a special thanks to Andrea Polo-Brizuela and to Cameron Snow, both of the class of 2022. Each of them has played a critical role in the installation of a wall of early photographs by Jona Frank, now on view in the Becker Gallery as part of the exhibition. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you both so much. A special thanks is also due to Daniel Rechtschaffen of the class of 2018, who actually appears in one of Jona Frank's Cherry Hill photographs. So I challenge you to find Daniel in that book, which you'll find next door. I'm also grateful to a number of Bowdoin faculty members who have shown their support of this project, especially Mike Colster, whose generosity in assisting with equipment and helping to connect Jona with students on campus played a key role in the success of this project. Special thanks as well to Professors Dana Bird, Audrey Shakespeare, and Tricia Welsh. I wish to acknowledge above all the incredible effort and dedication of the Bowdoin College Museum of Art staff. In particular, for their work on this project, I thank Suzanne Bergeron, Leslie Bird, Laura Latman, Joe Haluska, Jose Ribas, and Amanda Skinner for their extraordinary contributions. We are also deeply appreciative to the funders who have offered their support. This includes the Elizabeth B.G. Hamlin Fund, the Stevens L. Frost Endowment Fund, Peter Grua of the class of 76 and Mary O'Connell of the class of 76, Laura Dern, and the Roy A. Hunt Foundation. Finally, we wish to express our profound appreciation, as always, to the museum's advisory council, to Dean of Academic Affairs, Jennifer Scanlon, and to Bowdoin's president, Clayton Rose. Following my conversation with Jona, which will begin in a few minutes, and which will touch upon her background and the creation of Cherry Hill and Jona Frank Model Home, we will look forward to opening the floor to a discussion with the audience. So please recall the questions that you have as we go along. We very much look forward to the conversation to come. I will ask you to join me in welcoming Jona, but I'm going to ask her to hold before she comes up on the stage so that we can see two wonderful shorts that she's created for us. But before we begin those films, may I ask you please to join me in welcoming Jona Frank in person to Bowdoin College.
Though to say we got much hope, and if I am lost, it's only for a little while. Oh, a tree for all these problems. They can find us for the moment. And yeah, for all past effort, they're buried deep beneath our hearts and somewhere in our stomachs. And hey, tread for all others. When awful people, they surround you. Ain't they just like monsters? They come to feed on us, giant little animals for us. Though to say we got much hope, if I am lost, it's only for a little while. Though to say we got much hope, if I am lost, it's only for a little while. I am lost, it's only for a little while. If I am lost, it's only for a little while.
Well, as our wonderful colleagues in the sound booth do the transition, great, wonderful, back to our slides. Jona, I want to begin with a question that grows out of my profound appreciation for those wonderful shorts or compilations that you prepared for us, because I think that they provide a reminder of the fact that the photographs for which you're so well known, and many examples of which people will see in Cherry Hill, actually grow out of a background, an artistic background that in many ways began with film and cinema. And you've talked a little bit about Cherry Hill as something that's suspended between photography and cinema. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about the significance of your background in film and how you came to move to the still image.
Well, actually, everything really began with still photography. And then it was in making photographs and starting to explore through photography that I became more interested in moving into motion picture. And actually, there was a kind of a marked moment for me, which was that the early pictures to me, which you'll see in the exhibition, so much of the early still work for me is really hard to look at because it feels very, it's hard for me to look at it now because it feels very derivative of all the photographers that I was interested in when I was younger and that I was trying to emulate. And I wanted to understand how these photographers could take those pictures. How did you get in the room? Like, how did Diane Arbus get in the room with that couple who were in that very kind of ordinary living room, but they were naked? Like, how did you make that happen? So I started to imitate things, like go to twins festivals. And I just thought if I could figure out how to get there and try to make pictures like the pictures I was looking at, then maybe I could figure out, you know, other stories I could tell. And I remember being at this twins festival, and they're very strange places to be because you are the oddity. You are they call you singletons, and they're very apologetic to you when you're at a twins festival that you're not a twin. And I was at one festival photographing, and I turned around and I saw a whole group of twins just walking across this field, and they were all mirroring each other in their walk and their gait and their posture. And it wasn't just in dress, it was they'd aged in a similar way. And I found that fascinating. And at that moment, I remember thinking, I can't just be still photography. Mm-hmm. And I think that I've always been interested in this intersection between making still photographs and making motion picture. And even if it was just brief moments of motion, mm-hmm. That was something that I was always fascinated by. And I think in a lot of ways wanted to bring that into more of a fine art world in not only just a traditional film world.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fascinating, and we'll see elements of some of that spillover, I think, as we move forward, looking at your
Definitely.
work. Jonah, you and I met, I think around 2004, shortly after you had finished a project called High School, which I find absolutely fascinating. We do have a copy of this book over in the exhibition. That then led into another project about 4 years later, Write, Portraits from the Evangelical Ivy League in 2008. And then you and I had a chance to reconnect in person shortly after you finished this project, The Modern Kids, which features young men who are boxers outside of Liverpool, England. And yesterday, I was fascinated to learn that in many ways, your work on this project in England was a point of entry back into thinking about your upbringing in Cherry Hill. And while I know that the work you were doing with High School, as well as Write, were also giving you a chance to document these coming of age moments, I wonder if you could say a little bit about how The Modern Kids began to bring you back in your mind to the moment of your own upbringing in suburban New Jersey.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that, I think each project at some point connected back to me in ways that when I began the projects, I didn't expect. So just as one example, when I was finishing the high school work, and I had maybe 60 pictures up all around my little workspace in San Francisco, I looked at them one day and I realized that I'd recreated my own high school experience, and that I could look at the pictures and say, that was the theater kid I went to high school with, and that was the popular girl, and that was, and that I had, it ultimately was all about me. I mean, in sort of returning to that. And in fact, one of the essays in the catalog is by an art critic, Jory Finkel, and she relates high school back to Cherry Hill, saying that she really felt that it was a precursor to Cherry Hill. But what the unexpected thing that happened when I was in Liverpool, England, and I worked on this project about this boxing club over a 3-year period, and the club was in a suburb of Liverpool, and so it was about 20 minutes from Liverpool. And I didn't drive while I was there because everything's on the other side of the road, and that was already have some dyslexia, so that was already a bad idea. And so somebody was driving me to and from the club. And while this was happening, I felt like I was being driven from this job that I had in Philadelphia when I was in high school by my father back to Cherry Hill. And it was about the same distance. And for some reason, everywhere I went, particularly on these 2 trips, there was 80s music playing. And I would go into, like, one afternoon I had to go into Staples to do something, and there was like just blaring 80s music. And it was this thing that I felt like I was time traveling, that I had kind of gone back to the 80s. And I started to make notes about growing up in the suburbs in the notebook that I was using with the boxing project. And when I was putting the book together, I kept seeing these notes about Cherry Hill, and I kept thinking, why was I thinking so much about Cherry Hill? And then it sort of sparked this desire to want to explore that more and to think about some of the stories from my own childhood.
Well, it was interesting, Jona, when I went back and looked at the modern kids in light of what you've accomplished with Cherry Hill, I was very struck by a small drawing on the inside cover of the Modern Kids, which I believe is by your son, Lucian. This little drawing on the right that said, "Fight." And for the first time, it hit me that, so to speak, that in some way there was a message about perseverance and a message about grappling with the challenges of life that was perhaps not only relevant to what these young men were doing metaphorically, but perhaps also relevant to some of the challenges that you had perhaps understood yourself to go through from your earliest years in Cherry Hill up until the time you began to find your path as an artist. And so I was very, very struck by this sort of metaphorical through line that really began to make itself felt to me. And I think that stood out to me all the more because when I reconnected with Jona in person, we'd been in touch a lot by email and so forth and phone. But when we saw each other in 2017, the image over on the left of a young man named James was hanging at the National Portrait Gallery. And I think that it was on that occasion that I first heard about what was beginning to take shape in terms of the thinking for Cherry Hill. And I had another really fun moment in preparing for this talk when I saw Jona's initial short, picture this, and I saw these 3 photographs of these young girls, which I was kind of interested, I'd never seen before, because they are, I think, extraordinary studies in this question of a young woman coming of age, but also extraordinary in that it's hard to know what to look at, the young girl or the background. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about these 3 amazing young people who you were photographing and why you chose to photograph them so emphatically as you did.
Well, I was definitely starting to think about ideas of pattern and wallpaper and how clothing could blend in backgrounds and wanting to control more about my work, like control the backgrounds and set things up, because so many of the early portraits are environmental. And in this particular grouping, all of these girls are in 5th grade. And I was interested in these ideas of when we begin to change as children, like what are the points of progression? And there's a definitive change when you start 6th grade and being 12 years old. And I remember, like, a friend said, oh, I'd love for you to include my daughter in that. And she is like 4 months into 6th grade, and I was like, it's too late. We've missed, the boat has sailed. You know, that it had to be before this change and before you went to junior high. And there's a lot of, there are moments, I guess, that, you know, they're not defined. Like, we don't wake up one day and say, well, I'm no longer a child, and I'm, you know, now it's an adult from here forward. Because those moments happen when we're not, you know, there's no way to mark them really. I mean, we try to have markers, you know, of birthdays or graduations or some specifics, but it's much more an emotional state. And I felt like this was a marker of leaving, you know, that early girlhood and beginning to be a teenager and beginning to explore. And it was actually kind of amazing because all of these kids live in my neighborhood. And so I was watching them change, and they're all in Cherry Hill in one form or another. Like the girl on the left, she plays Francie Nolan in one of the recreated images for Cherry Hill. She's also in the big wreck shot. The girl in the center plays Emily Dickinson, and she's in the big wreck shot. And the girl on the right is in the big wreck shot. So it was very much like, you know, everybody in the neighborhood contributed to the project. But this was right before this change. And that was sort of me testing out. And this is definitely a precursor to Cherry Hill, because it was in one of these shoots that I started to play around with wigs and how it would change people. And I put a short brown-haired wig on one of the girls, and I think you saw that in the little compilation piece about Cherry Hill, my book, of, you know, the girl in the dress and the girl in the Bazooka Joe t-shirt. And that was taken the same day we took these pictures. And it was all, it was at that moment that I thought, you know, she could be one of the Jonas. She could be one of the young Jonas. But I was really interested in trying to get this sense that you were kind of emerging out of the wallpaper, and that your clothes were reflecting what was in the wallpaper, and starting to think about those ideas.
And so, Jona, on that note, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how this idea of Cherry Hill began to gel. And you alluded a little bit to this transformation of one girl by the gesture of placing a wig on her. And I imagine that perhaps that was the moment at which you began to see yourself in those young women.
Definitely. And there's something funny about this picture, which is that this girl, her sister, her older sister, plays the main young version of myself. And she was there for the whole shoot. And for the whole shoot, she kept saying, "Can I be in a picture? I really want to be in a picture." And she had really long brown hair. And I went to put the toile dress that matched the wallpaper on her older sister, and it was too small. And I was like, okay, we have to get your sister. This is her big moment. And we put the wig on her sister, and she walked around for the whole afternoon and said to everybody, "I'm wearing a wig. I'm wearing a wig." And it was just, you know, couldn't have been more obvious. But it was very funny. And it turned out to be a perfect fit with her. And but this notion of being stuck in childhood. And, you know, one of the things that was very hard in my family was that I had 3 older brothers, and I was the youngest and the only girl. And my parents had an incredibly hard time with me getting older. And they really wanted me to stay a child. I mean, really, up to a couple of years ago, there was a visit home, and I had the feeling that if I just said, "You know what, I'm just going to stay home. I'm just going to stay here," they would be completely fine with it. They would have been like, "Thank God, she's finally come back." But this sense of, could you just stay this way? And that was the feeling I wanted to try to convey, that feeling of just blending in, of becoming part of the wallpaper, but not really being seen as somebody who maybe had their own ideas or their own intentions, or just their own desires. So there's also, wallpaper covered every surface of our house where I grew up. And being very attracted to story and to image and illustration, I always looked to the wallpaper to for the story to change, and the story never changed. But I was always piecing together what was going on in the wallpaper, and there was a toile print that was, this pastoral print, and I was very curious about the people who lived in that print. And so I wanted to replicate that, and try to replicate, internal ideas through these visuals.
Jona, it's interesting. One of my favorite moments in the beginning of Cherry Hill is when you describe this moment at which the camera was actually taken out of your hands. And you, I think, in that moment also begin to describe to us how, if you couldn't use the physical camera, you were recording pictures in your mind, which ultimately played out in terms of the development of this larger project. And I think that this is the first image, not only the image that we see on the cover, but the first image that you shot as this project began. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what's going on here. Who are we looking at?
Well, it was the first picture taken for the book. And this was taken in 2016. And one of the early ideas was that I had written a couple of stories, and when I was talking about the stories, my husband said to me, you know, you have to see if it's going to work. You have to try to piece all these elements together. You know, you're going to production design this, you're going to create a set, you're going to need costumes, and just all the pieces that you take in doing something at this scale. And so I decided to do a handful of photographs before I just dove in and wrote the whole book. And this was one of the first pictures. And the thing about this picture is that the title for this is Mirror, Mirror. And as far as I can remember, my mother and I never wore matching dresses. But I wanted to create not just memories, which some of the images are very specific memories from my childhood, but also the feeling of what it was like to be with my mother. And this idea that what she really wanted was for me to mirror her life, was for me to give her affirmation that all her choices were the right choices. And if I was going to mirror her life, I was going to do that by becoming a domestic, queen. And so I was being schooled in the ways of domesticity. And one of those ways of being domestic and taking care of your family was knowing how to make a good pie and knowing how to bake and knowing how to be in a kitchen. And that is very much about what that picture is about for me, is trying to kind of live up to this image of what it is to be a woman, or what it is to be, to take care of a family. And also this idea that this is what women get boxed into. This is what we try to say, to break out of. And if you have, the challenge really is if you have desires that go beyond that house, what do you do with that? And so some of the pictures really are about feelings that I had about being with my mother, and not just like direct recreations. And then others are much more direct recreations. Gary Winogrand has this saying where he says, if you didn't take the picture, you weren't there. And my challenge with this project was, well, what if you were there? And what if you did take the picture, but you just don't have any tangible evidence of it? And this whole notion that to make a photograph is proof. Proof that you existed and proof that that moment was there. And we rely on photographs for a certain sense of proof, for a certain sense of this is my family and this is where I belong and I wore this Halloween costume and I was well taken care of as a child, and all of that thing of creating family snapshots and giving us that sense of security and telling us this is where you belong. And I wanted to go back in and photograph things that were never meant to be photographed. They were things that were meant to be forgotten. I mean, if there was ever a moment where I would have said to my mother when she was having a particularly bad, as she would call it, a gray day, and I would say, hey, you know what, could you just stay right there because I'm going to take your photograph while you're feeling really depressed and it's a great image? She never would have gone for that. Like, that wasn't something I would be able to do. But I was also a kid, and I think that kids really absorb what they see is happening, around them, and I certainly did. And I wanted to, defy Gary Winogrand and say, well, I think you can go back and you can, even if you weren't, even if you were there, but even if you couldn't take the picture, you do take the picture. We take it with our poetic memory, and it lives in our poetic memory. And we all have those moments where on a completely random day, for whatever reason, something sparks a memory of our childhood, and we can see it really clearly. And I had a really strong sense of that, and that led to me reimagining these moments from my childhood.
And Jona, on that note, I'm going to just advance to the next image, because I think this is, in fact, a really great pairing of one image on the right that is a recreation of a snapshot that you still have, and an image on the left, which was one of these moments that perhaps you could record with your memory, but never made its way onto film.
Right. I feel like the one on the left, if that had happened to somebody today, somebody would take out an iPhone and take a picture of it. But the one on the left is about a story in which I was at a supermarket with my father, and I knocked over a whole display of Lucky Charms cereal. And there were literally like 100 boxes that just were everywhere. And it connects to this story that I tell in the book about this period where I was in this sort of OCD state. And I felt compelled every morning, or I just, you know, there's OCD, there's no logic to it. So this sense that I had to read every word on the cereal box that was on the table in front of me. And if I didn't read every word on the cereal box, something terrible would happen. So I made every one of those cereal boxes. And I physically, you know, put them all together. And there were 100 cereal boxes. And they were all over our kitchen, just in stacks. And my husband came home one day and he said, "So this is a story about OCD." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "And you don't think you have OCD anymore?" So that was, and then the other picture is my mother's first Christmas with my father. And she would tell the story of their first Christmas together, and she said that he spoiled her and she never felt so loved. And I guess he got her dozens of presents on their first Christmas. So I wanted to recreate that moment. And when I did it, I started to wrap empty boxes, and it was around Christmas that I took the picture. I guess it was Christmas like 2016, and I started to wrap boxes of neighbors' presents because I just felt bad that I was just wasting all the paper. And so we surrounded that, and Laura came over to do the picture. It's in my living room, which we dressed and put that wallpaper up. And you know, ever like being the professional actor prepared for anything, she went to take the picture and she said, "I have no ring on." She would definitely be wearing a wedding ring. So I took my ring off and I gave it to her. And then we took the picture, and she was running to a press event, and she left. And about 45 minutes later, I realized that she left wearing my ring. And I was like, I have to track her down because that would be very bad if she went to a public event wearing a wedding ring. And I just thought that's going to be in Us magazine, and she'll have to deny it, and thought that would be bad.
And so, of course, Jona, you were working with an actor with whom I think we're all familiar, Laura Dern on the right, who, of course, will be featured in the forthcoming Jurassic Park, which is soon to come out. And I wonder, I just want to say a little bit quickly about your beautiful sequencing of images, which I think you'll all have an opportunity to enjoy in the exhibition. But in some ways, I think the very presentation of the pictures, Jona, and the way in which you marshal this Kuleshov effect of helping us to think about how one image affects the other is one of the ways in which I see these cinematic techniques entering into the realm of the still. And I think it will be interesting for members of the audience to have that experience in the show. But just for fun, I'm just going to move through these images, observing Laura Dern's own connection to her environment, and especially those giant scissors. And I just want to ask you if you would say a few words about what it meant to work with somebody like Laura Dern, who herself is a mom, as are you, and who I believe you originally got to know as young mothers.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nice connection between motherhood and the domestic meeting the artistic, and coming to a place where we could find a way to collaborate. I mean, I remember once going someplace with Laura, and we were driving somewhere together, and there was a group of people crossing the street, and there was a woman waiting to cross the street, and she had a very strange posture, and she was wearing these bright red pants. And I thought, you know, if I was going to photograph that group, she would be a standout person to photograph. And just as I was thinking that, Laura said, "Look how that woman is standing. I want to remember that." And I realized that she sort of files things away to use as character traits in a role, and you know, and I would choose to document it in a different way. But we both have this artistic approach in the day-to-day of observing things. And then when it came up to do this project, you know, I was trying to create the feeling of essentially being in a film, you know, that this sense of kind of walking through a memory, or it feeling very cinematic. And I just thought, you know, if you have the opportunity to work with an iconographic actress who is known for her roles in cinema, then it will place people right into that idea that it will feel like cinema. And when she agreed to do it, I obviously jumped at the chance and felt super fortunate for it.
And Jona, one of the things I love about this picture is that Laura Dern is holding these ginormous scissors, which are huge, and which get at a way in which I think your sensitivity to not only the environments, but sort of the emphatic presence of props becomes so interesting to me, and your attention to these tiny little details that help to place your viewer in a particular psychological space. And one of the fun things for me about this particular project, the museum project, was thinking about what could we do within a three-dimensional space that would add breadth to what had already been achieved with Cherry Hill. And so part of what has been fun is bringing some of the quote-unquote props or objects, suggestive objects, into the realm of the museum. And I'm eager to hear from the audience, so I'm going to just do a little bit of speed motion through some slides, just hinting at some of the things that you'll find in the exhibition, including a ringing phone from 1973. You can probably tell which of these three photographs I shot, but I hope you'll enjoy that. The dress and this amazing wallpaper, which perhaps we can hear a little bit more about later. And then this incredible birthday party, You Are Not Enough. But Jona, I wonder if for a moment I could ask you to talk about, in a sense, the title piece in the show. The exhibition is entitled Jona Frank Model Home. And one of my favorite elements of this exhibition is the degree to which the house itself comes to occupy literally a central place in this show. And I know you put a lot of care into the development of this object and also into the way in which it's imaged here. And I wondered if you could talk with us a little bit about this model house and what it means to you, and how and why it came to occupy the space it does in the exhibition.
Well, one of the things that I did, I had sort of 4 edicts, or 4 things that I always wanted to go back to when I was working on the whole project. So when I was writing, I had this written over my desk so that I could remember it, and I would always write it at the beginning of my notebook. And the 4 things were notions of like repeated pattern, the idea of walking through a memory, how childhood as costume, and this idea that things don't fit. So something feeling a little off, like the giant scissors, you know, it just makes you feel like something's a bit off. And I wanted you, the first thing that you see in the exhibition, I wanted it to give you this sense of place, this sense of an invitation into this home, and that it was the model home. I mean, that the home that you see is the model home that my parents first saw, and I modeled that all on the early photographs that they, you know, like with the black shutters. And in fact, in Cherry Hill, you'll see a similar home, and the home that is exploded that has green shutters, because it changed as I grew up there. But this is the version of the original home that, you know, brought them to the suburbs and really gave my mother fulfilled her dream. And I wanted to share that sense of it. But it is the home that you can't enter or exit. There are no doorknobs on the home, and that's intentioned. And within the home, there are projected photographs. And it's also meant for me to represent childhood, and this notion that our childhood lives within the walls of the house that we grew up in. And we carry the memories and we leave the memories, but we essentially can never go back to it in the way that you can never go back to childhood.
And one of the other things that was so much fun for me about the show, and which I hope everybody will enjoy, is the really careful attention you and Alex gave to transforming the feel of the galleries into that of a suburban home, down to the installation of specially designed wallpaper, which perhaps Jona will tell you more about if you're interested, wainscoting on the walls, and then even the installation, actually I'll come back to this in a moment, but even the installation of wood paneling so that we could watch you plotting your escape. And I have to say, I think for me, one of the most sort of touching and magical parts of this whole process was recognizing that this moment at which you sprung free of Cherry Hill, and I feel like in some ways that is mirrored a little bit in these beautiful self-portraits, the visible Jonas that you see beckoning you into the museum, gave way to this opportunity to bring young people into the museum and to help perhaps transform your own experiences as an artist maturing from childhood into a professional sphere, an opportunity for mentorship. And so I want to recognize very emphatically the work that both Cameron Snow and Andrea did, especially in curating this wall in the Becker Gallery that gives us a sense of the progression from your earliest days as a budding photographer in your 20s up into the present day. And I wondered if I could just invite you to conclude with a few words about what that's meant.
Well, I always really liked that you used Becker, the Becker Gallery, as a way for students to contribute to curating something. And I think that given that looking at that work is just not easy for me, because I look at it and just see mistakes. And I just thought, I really love the idea that giving this to a student who is in their 20s, in their early 20s, the pictures that I took in my early 20s, and having conversations with them about, people like Robert Frank and Diane Arbus and Gary Winogrand and August Sonder, and having an exchange about photography, and then saying, go forward and find the ways in which you think my work connects with their work. I just wanted to put it out there to see what they would come up with and how they would kind of tackle that assignment, and they did an incredibly good job. And I know that I know Cameron is more of a painting major and less of a photography major, and he really took the time to research these photographers. And I loved the idea of them going through those books, and then I basically overloaded them with about 170 proof sheets and said, go forward and find the pictures you like. But the way that they grouped them was very fresh for me and exciting to see. And they chose photographs that I overlooked, 20, 25 years ago, and just printed a week ago. I mean, literally went back in and printed a week ago, and pictures I never noticed on the proof sheets. So it was fascinating for me to have that experience, and to have someone else look at it in just a very new way.
It's wonderful. Well, we love that commitment to seeing things in a new way. And one thing I have come to learn is that every time I'm part of a conversation with Jona, I learn new things. But what's really even, I think, has become for both of us probably even more exciting than just the back and forth, which we've enjoyed over many years, is bringing other folks into the conversation. And so I'd love, on that note, if I may, to just open the floor. And we purposely brought a number of images, so we can certainly pull those up if people want to ask about specific objects. But it's so great to have everybody together here in person. And on that note, we'd love to open up the floor. We are recording this evening's interview, and so for that reason, I would request, if you don't mind, that folks just take advantage of the microphones so that we capture your voice. And let me just ask if there are any questions for Jona Frank.
Hi, it's great to meet the artist here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And I've seen your book, read your book, and I'm interested in the toile wallpaper. Did you create this wallpaper, the two kinds, the green one that shows the tree and the various things? Yeah, that's one, but the other one that's the green one?
Well, there are 5 toile wallpapers in Cherry Hill.
Yep.
And each of them, I worked with a graphic designer, and I would pull images and give him detailed descriptions of what should go near each other, what the intent was behind them, what the story was that they were meant to connect to, and then he would draw out the illustrations for the wallpaper, and
Right.
then we'd go back and forth until it was right, and I felt like it told the story. And it's really an additional layer in Cherry Hill, is that if you read the book, you get the stories, but then if you go back and you read it again, you see that in the toile wallpapers, you're being told the story.
Yes.
On another, it's like another layer of the stories.
Right, that's what I got, but I was just like, wow, you also created the wallpaper too. Really
But
cool.
this was the original wallpaper that I used during the production of the photographs. And then when Alex and I were working on the book, we loved the toile so much that we decided that it would be good to approach this other designer and say, would you be willing to do more? I think it really worked nicely. It was this great additional element. And then, so 3 of those wallpapers are in the exhibition.
Are there other questions for Jona?
I have a general question and a specific question. But first, the work is so interesting, and we're seeing pictures and images, but so many of the images are images you created literarily and evoked through your written expression. I'm curious, the general part, about how that process went, and how you excavated the memories, and if there were other memories, and if it was a laborious process, or if you were overwhelmed with them, and which ones you included and which ones you discarded. The specific question is, visual and about this, is the diary entries in the book. Are those real diary entries, or were those manufactured?
Totally real, 100%. My diaries from childhood.
I love it. And then I'm curious about because I was going to say, how many versions did you do to get those?
There were stories that I took out that I didn't include. There was one really significant story that I did not remember until the book was published, and I was like, oh, I wish I'd put that in because it fit really well. And there is a sense of how the stories are told in the book. I wanted them to feel photographic. When I say that, I mean that when you take a photograph, you have just the information in the frame. That the composition is the detail of the composition is the narrative, and that what goes beyond that frame is your imagination. And the stories have that feeling too. Some of them just drift off, and I wanted that. I wanted the sense of I'm not going to tell you this in this incredibly extensive way. And in many ways, it's also choosing one path. Following one path towards a story. I remember I read something that Susan Sontag wrote about memoir, and she said, you have to choose one story and follow that. And even though there are many stories to tell, my mother is a complicated, layered woman, and I could have told more stories about other parts of her. But this had a flow, and it worked the way that it did. So I think I think what you leave out is also as significant as what you leave in. It's about finding that balance.
Looks like we have a couple more questions.
Hello, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
My question is more about your use of August Saunders, Robert Frank, and Avedon, and that's such a broad range of work, and working. And I see that work still in your work. It's never left, and that's a good thing, I think. But I wonder how you fall on those, and is there some other artists that you might have reached to come up with your work, or that you would incorporate it in your work?
Well, I think that I was really interested in the worlds that, like the Avedon's early, his work in the American West was really fascinating to me. And this idea of going into people's worlds just through posture and clothing and their faces, and not seeing their environments, stripping the environments away, and what stories can you read of these people just from the information you're being given. But one thing actually that I was thinking about this recently, that when I first discovered Deanne Arbus, and I have to say that, you know, it almost feels cliche to say, oh my God, you're influenced by Arbus, because I feel like she, more than anybody, has influenced young artists, you know, male, female, everywhere. That she just opened up this world of, that what? Well, yes, Cindy Sherman. But I mean, of like bringing people into these secrets, bringing people into people's private worlds. And when you're in those worlds, they feel like this merger of fiction and nonfiction. And it feels like you're looking at real people in almost a made-up environment. I mean, you know, the Jewish giant and the way that his parents are looking at him like he's some kind of a monster. And, you know, how did I create you? And I think that was something that really stuck with me. Like, how do you create an environment but make it feel fiction and nonfiction? And I was looking at her work again recently and thought how much it influenced what I did in Cherry Hill.
Right. I get the same feeling with Robert Frank in the Americans, you know, because it's like this world, and especially in those times, it was that juxtaposed kind of scenes always, you know what I mean, with like what was going on in America at the time. That wasn't shown.
Right, it was very controversial at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, Jona.
Hi.
I wanted to explore more about this idea of escaping your mother's expectations. And I'm sort of wondering, you know, many of us probably had that as children, but what's one of the expectations that you strove to escape that perhaps turned into, or you converted into, a strength that has created the artist that you are today?
Well, there's a whole installation about that in the exhibition.
Is it this one?
Yes, and this notion of being told that my mother would say that I wasn't feminine enough, and you know, and there's a story about it in Cherry Hill, and it was a daily comment, and she would look at me and she would look at my father, and I would just be standing there like ready to go to school, you know, at 7, 8 years old, and she'd go, I don't know. I mean, do you see it? She's just not feminine enough. She's just not feminine. And after a while, all I heard was, you know, you are not enough. And I think that's something that it's just something that you do carry with you. I mean, there are messages that you carry with you and that you take them into your life and you think, you know, why do I feel insecure about this? Or why don't I like to wear this? Or what is it, you know, and they all go back to being given these messages.
Right.
And I remember in a conversation that I had with Laura Dern, she said, you weren't enough, Jona, you weren't enough. You were too much. And you said, okay, I'm too much, and I'm going to go out into the world, and I'm going to explore lives and make work about being too much.
Got it. Got it.
So I think I turned it around.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, and I think that I can't think of a better note to end on, except for that we did have a wonderful conversation a couple of days ago with a reporter from the Bowdoin Orient who turned us on to a big question that people were asking around campus. And we promised that if she came to tonight's presentation, we would shed some light on these ladies who you may have seen facing out towards Park Row. So Jona, perhaps we could just conclude with a quick note about the visible Jonas.
Okay, so much of the book is about being one person on the inside and one person on the outside. And if you read the book, in the prologue, it is a story about, you know, just kind of me going along in my own flighty way. I was 6 years old, and, you know, I took in the world in a fantasy. I mean, the teacher called my mother to say, she's going to art class, and she just sits at her desk, and everybody gets these big pieces of white paper, and she's not doing anything on the paper. and there was concern about it. Now, I think that, you know, like years later, I sort of deemed that the concern was that I had some learning issue or you know, just some performance issue. But for me, I just loved looking at the white piece of paper. I loved that it was just perfect. And I loved watching everybody else create their things, but I just didn't want to touch it. I just wanted to just enjoy the white. There was like joy in just the white piece of paper. And in an instant, I was told, you can't be that person. You got to put something on the paper. So it was like, you know, it was practically a punishment of don't be the one who stands out in class. Just be the one who falls in line and does this. And what I learned was you've got to hide on the inside the things that you got to be careful what you show. And my brother had this toy, the visible model, and I was fascinated with the toy, and I was fascinated that we were all the same on the inside, but we couldn't see any of it, you know, that it was all hidden within. And so I wanted to create my own version of the visible girl. And the idea was I wanted to create the one in the center where what we all share, you know, which is we all share those insides. And then the rest are imagination. And that's where we're all different on the inside. And we all have our own imagination. And when I finished it, I realized that I also created the 5 senses, as far as I was concerned, which was, you know, the blossoms are smell, the lucky charms are taste, the telephone cords are hearing, the twigs are touch, and then for me, the body is really seeing, because I feel like we see with our whole body.
Well, I think on that note, I want to thank Jona Frank, and I want to invite all of you to come see with your whole body Jona Frank Model Home. I hope you can come join us at our premiere. There are party hats for each of you, created by the artist, and we very much look forward to continuing the conversation there. For anybody who would like to have a book signed, Jona will do that, and we're just so grateful to you for being with us this evening to launch the era of in-person programming and to celebrate and learn from this extraordinary contemporary artist. Thank you for being with us, and thank you, Jona. Please.